Welcome into 3 Points with Chris Mannix, part of the Volume Sports Podcast Network. I want to welcome everyone in listening live on AMP. If you want to be first in line to listen to any of this content or any of the content from across the Volume Sports Network, log in, sign in, follow on AMP. I'm at Chris Mannix. Follow the Volume at the Volume as well. It's a great place to get all that content early on. If you're watching on YouTube, welcome as well. Make sure you subscribe to the Volume Sports YouTube page while you are watching. So Howard Beck is joining me, contributor, GQ Sports, contributor, the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm recording this on Friday morning, less than 12 hours after the conclusion of the NBA draft. And Howard, you were the perfect person to talk to about this because while the draft itself was largely anticlimactic, I think the top of the draft had some intrigue and is going to have some intrigue for years to come. Not with Victor Wembanyama. There was no drama there. Victor was long projected as the number one overall pick. But at number 2, we had the Charlotte Hornets selecting Brandon Miller. And, for the last few weeks, few months, this has been reported as a difficult decision to make between Brandon Miller, the kind of Paul George-esque swingman from Alabama, and Scoot Henderson, a Russell Westbrook type that played for the G League Ignite last year. It's very possible both these guys could turn out to be fantastic players, but we'll be talking about them like we talked about Greg Oden and Kevin Durant, like we're currently talking about Luka Doncic and Trae Young. So I want to dive into this a little bit because you have covered Scoot Henderson as much as anybody. You've written multiple pieces about Scoot over the last year or so. What was your take? What was your reaction to the Hornets drafting Miller over Scoot Henderson?
So listen, as we know, Chris, you and I have both been doing this a long time, and our draft night impressions, our impressions of a player as they walk that stage, are not always the same as how we will assess them 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the road. So big caveat that I think is necessary for all these discussions. I don't think there's very often a definitive version of this where you can say, absolutely, this team made a mistake. Absolutely, this team won or lost. I know we do trade grades and draft grades and all these other things, these snap decisions we all make in this business, but they're usually ill-advised in the moment. So there's the big caveat. It does feel to me like the Charlotte Hornets did the safe thing. They went for fit over ceiling. And for all we know, Brandon Miller's ceiling will be really high. And by the way, if he becomes Paul George, the player that he's been compared to most often and who he says is his GOAT, who he idolizes, I think we'll feel pretty good. I think the Hornets will feel pretty good about him and about his fit with LaMelo Ball and their young core. And we'll see where that all goes. But it certainly seems to me that the consensus around the league was that Scoot Henderson is the better player, not just on day one, but has the higher ceiling and is also a guy who, all right, granted, you already have a primary ball handler in LaMelo Ball, but because of the style that LaMelo plays and the style that Scoot plays, you could pair these two together. And also, I think more often than not, when you're that high in the draft, the number 2 overall pick, you got to go for best talent and not best fit, especially if you're a team like the Hornets that is many players away still from being a good team. And so I'm not a draft expert. I know Scoot, and I first talked to him when he was still 17 years old and about to skip his senior year of high school to go straight to the G League Ignite. I have a better feel for who he is, what he's about, not just his talent level, but like I'm high on Scoot Henderson in large part because I think I know enough to know that he's about the right things. I think I get who he is, his family. I was around them for several days. The character and the commitment to the game, the work ethic, all of that's there. So if I were a GM drafting in this draft, I would feel really, really good about Scoot Henderson. And I'm not knocking Brandon Miller. I'm just saying I don't know him as well. So that's, kind of a necessary caveat there. I fear that what the Hornets did was made the safe pick the fit pick as opposed to the talent pick. And it makes for a really interesting, secondary discussion that we're going to get to, of course, because it means that Scoot fell to Portland, who already had Dame. And they've got a whole thing that they got to deal with now too, and trying to figure out fit.
Yeah, before we get to Dame, I had the same reaction that you did. And I know Mitch Kupchak has, said immediately after the draft, we believe that Brandon Miller is or was the best player available in that spot. We should point that out immediately. And Brandon Miller certainly has the resume to earn that praise. He averaged almost 19 points per game last year with Alabama, averaged about 9 rebounds per game, shot the three ball really well, shot about 39% from three. And, that's going to be huge as he steps into the NBA. Looks like someone that is going to be a ready-made three-point shooter. And I think defensively he's pretty good too. I mean, he's got the usual caveats of needs to put on weight and bulk up and all those things, but I think he has pretty high ceiling. I just think, and a lot of the NBA types that I talk to believe that Scoot Henderson has a higher ceiling. And look, you draft Scoot Henderson and, look, I know we're a league now where it's not, the 6'2" point guard, the 6'6" guard, the 6'8" small forward. We're beyond that now, but it would be difficult to play Scoot Henderson and LaMelo Ball together. They're both kind of pure playmakers who need the ball in their hands. That's my concern with this pick as well, that they went down the safer road. And look, there's a pretty checkered history of teams that draft for need and not for overall talent. I mean, off the top of my head, I remember Joe Alexander, remember him? Drafted in the 08 draft by Milwaukee. That was a draft that Milwaukee, I think they had Andrew Bogut at the time. They were set at center, so they bypassed Brook Lopez, who was taken 2 picks later. They bypassed Roy Hibbert, who was taken about the 17th pick in the draft. That was a draft pick, I think, that was more for need than overall talent. You go back even further, I think there'll be a lot of people in Detroit that would dispute this, but I've heard some people, some publicly, some privately, say that one of the reasons they drafted Darko Milicic in 2003 was because Tayshaun Prince was already there. And they had someone kind of filling that small forward slot for them. So, that was a very visible and public debacle there. But you want to go more recently, Howard? Like, if Golden State was building a team from scratch in 2020, would they have drafted James Wiseman or LaMelo Ball?
They would have drafted LaMelo Ball, no question.
They would have drafted LaMelo Ball. That was a pick that was made because they had Steph Curry and they had Klay Thompson already locked in to that backcourt. Prime Hall of Fame caliber players. Wiseman turned out to be a really bad pick for them, and they had to effectively give him away to get his contract off the book. So it's very dangerous to draft for need and not the best overall talent. So we'll see which way they go.
I would just say, like, in terms of the Hornets fit with, like a LaMelo Ball, Scoot Henderson backcourt, if they had gone that direction, like LaMelo Ball's a big guard. He's 6'7", and Scoot is not a small point either. He's like 6'4" and possibly still growing. He's super strong, by the way. He's long, he's strong. Like Scoot Henderson had an NBA body the first day I met him when he was 17.
He does.
And he's only gotten better. Like the dude is just cut. And you mentioned earlier, the comps to him from the time he was in high school were Russell Westbrook, Derrick Rose. He's working with Steph Curry now. They've got kind of an arrangement going on heading into next season. And so like they're connecting now and then. So he's got the best possible tutor in the world to help him with his long distance shooting. So I'm not convinced that Scoot and LaMelo Ball would have been a bad pairing. I do think the more natural pairing, understandably, is LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller. And again, if Brandon Miller does become more of a Paul George type, and that, by the way, that includes the ball handling too. Like, you've got to have the ball handling and the playmaking. The reason Paul George is great is not just because he's long and rangy and can defend multiple positions, but Paul George has ball handling and playmaking skills. And I think with Brandon Miller, there's still some question about him developing in that area, right? So if he does, then Brandon Miller is the guy you want in today's NBA, because this has now become a league of, really versatile 6'7", 6'8", 6'9" wings who can guard multiple positions, handle, shoot, score, whatever. The Jason Tatums of the world, or Durant, the taller version of it, LeBron, even Kawhi, right? Paul George himself. Having those kinds of players is really important. And if Brandon Miller can hit that tier, be a perennial all-star, with kind of the complete package, I think the Hornets will be perfectly happy with him.
Let me ask you this. Is any part of you more skeptical about this pick because officially Michael Jordan was the one that was making it? Look, let's be real here. Michael Jordan's draft history is bad. It's really, really,
going all the
really
way back. Yeah, going all the way back to the beginning. Yeah.
Adam Morrison was the first pick when he took over as head of basketball operations in Charlotte. I know people have tried to distance him from that pick, but the facts are the facts. He was in control of that team going into that draft. And then subsequently, whether it's DJ Augustine or Michael Kidd-Gilchrist or go down the list. There's a bunch of them, a bunch of picks that have made that have set the Hornets back and are among the reasons that team made exactly 3 playoff appearances in Jordan's time as an owner and never advanced past the first round. Does that make you any more skeptical? Because Michael,
and that's through multiple GMs too, right? You can't blame any one Hornets administration. The one constant has been Jordan himself.
Mm-hmm.
Listen,
who is involved in this? Like he's involved in this process. Like he was working out with Brandon Miller, just a couple of days ago.
Granted, the handoff is not official yet from Jordan to the new owners, so I don't want to get carried away with this. But, in this league, we always talk about, like, if you know a GM is going to get fired, if you know there's going to be a change in decision makers, you don't necessarily want that GM overseeing the next thing, the trade deadline or the draft, free agency, whatever. You're trying to make the transition as quickly as possible so that you're not sticking the next administration with the past administration's judgments that may not have been the right ones. When Jordan is, relinquishes control of this team, and I think he's still going to be like a minority owner, he's going to own a share of the team, but he will no longer be in control. It's reasonable to think, and I don't want to go too strong with this, but it's reasonable to think the new owners may have an overhaul of their own in mind, and it may be a different GM for all we know. And so it's just interesting that it's Michael Jordan and Mitch Kupchak who are making this decision, a very important one, and I don't want to say controversial one, right? Like it was a little bit of a coin flip. Maybe there were more people leaning Scoot over Brandon Miller among experts, but it's not like they made some major reach. And this is not Adam Morrison, right? This is not Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, I don't think. But it is interesting that sometime in the next few weeks, there's going to be a handoff to the new administration. We're going to see whether they keep all the same decision makers in place. And were they I would be curious to know, were they at all involved? Like it'd be weird if they were, to be honest. They're not the basketball experts, the new owners, but they may have a new GM for all we know. And that person might have been sitting there last night too going, I would have taken Scoot.
In defense of that Adam Morrison pick, that was one of the worst lotteries ever. LaMarcus Aldridge was the best player that came out of that lottery, and he was taken second overall, 1 pick ahead of Charlotte. I think if you go down, Brandon Roy was there, but we all know how Brandon Roy's career turned out with the knee problem that was in existence, going into that draft. So, that's one way of saying it was a bad pick, but it wasn't like there were a ton of great options available.
Wasn't that the JJ Redick draft too?
Yeah, he was I think 12th in that draft, and
you're
Randy
not just
Foy,
slamming that. You're not just slamming that draft because Redick was in it. Right?
No. Redick was a very good player, but yeah, it wasn't like I think who's drafted after Kidd-Gilchrist. I'm trying to remember. The Kidd-Gilchrist pick was bad. Yeah. I think Bradley Beal was the pick right after Kidd-Gilchrist that year. That's bad. That's a bad pick. When it was a
rough draft.
Yeah, no question. Speaking of transitions, let's look at what the Portland Trailblazers do now in the aftermath of them moving that number 3 overall pick. I've been reporting since Monday that the Blazers were not going to move this pick. I mean, yeah, if you came in and offered them like Zion plus, they'd probably do a deal like that. But Portland, because they understood the value and the potential of Scoot Henderson and the kind of franchise player he could become, they were not motivated to deal that pick. They tried to nibble around the fringes for a while. They were talking to Toronto about OG Anunoby, about Pascal Siakam, among other teams, but they weren't able to get any kind of deal done with some of the pieces and the picks that they had outside of number 3. So now they have the number 3 pick. Scoot Henderson is there saying all the right things, said he wants to play with Dame in Portland, but that's just not a situation that Damian Lillard is going to want to be a part of, where you've got a whole bunch of teens and early 20-somethings with Anthony Simons and now Scoot Henderson, Shaedon Sharpe, they're on a team that just isn't going to contend for anything in the immediate future. So What do you think? Let me put my stuff out there first. Like this, all the reporting around Damian Lillard, like that, sources say he doesn't want to do this. Like Dame's pretty transparent about what he wants to do and how he wants this whole thing to play out. And look, he's told me as recently as late March when I had this conversation with him that, if it gets to early to mid-July and this team has not upgraded to a level where he believes they can compete for something in the Western Conference, he will sit down with Joe Cronin. He will sit down with Bert Kold, who is running much of that organization now, and they'll have a discussion about what the best way to go forward with this. And that discussion will probably end up with Lillard and the Blazers looking for a trade. I do not expect, Howard, in the next couple of days to read reports like Lillard wants out, Lillard asks out, because Damian Lillard doesn't want to be that guy. Like he doesn't want to be, the guy. He doesn't want to go through what Kevin Durant went through in the last couple of years with Brooklyn, what Kyrie Irving went through. Like he wants to have if he exits Portland, he wants that exit to be graceful, and he wants it to be in a way where he's not the bad guy. And I think that's how this is going to play out over the next few weeks. They'll get probably through the first couple of days of free agency, see what they can do with some of the pieces that they have, future draft picks, all that. But I think when we get beyond that, they'll have an adult conversation between Lillard and the guys in that front office, and they'll decide that it's time for both these sides to move on. What's your read on it?
I feel like in some ways there's almost this standoff, and I don't mean that in a tense kind of way, between the organization and Dame Lillard, right? I think if you were, this is a little bit of speculation on my part, but I think this is a reasonable bit of speculation, that if you gave truth serum to Damian Lillard and you gave truth serum to Joe Cronin or whoever else you wanted to pick from Blazers, management, I think both would admit that probably the best thing for the organization and probably the best thing for Damian Lillard is a trade. Where this hits a snag is nobody wants to be the one to do it. The Blazers don't want to just say, you know what, for the good of the franchise, we're trading Damian Lillard. They would rather have Damian Lillard ask for the trade, demand the trade, politely negotiate the trade, whatever it may be, so that they don't have to say we traded the greatest player in franchise history over his potential objections, or without his, not just consent, but without him having initiated it. And then on the other side of it, you have Damian Lillard, who doesn't necessarily want to be the bad guy after year after year after year of saying, I want to stick through everything in Portland, thick and thin. I'm a Portland guy. I love it here. I love this franchise. I'm going to finish my career here. Oh, but by the way, I really wish they would build a decent team around me so that I'm not wasting the last years of my prime. So neither of them wants to be the bad guy. Neither of them wants to be the one to initiate the trade. And yet I think both of them probably at their core know that's the best thing for both parties. The counter argument to that would be, well, let's not be hasty. Let's figure out a way forward. Okay, fine. How many straight years of that have we seen? What I fear, Chris, in this situation is that the Trailblazers have been so paralyzed by this, not wanting to trade him, not quite knowing how or having the tools to build around him, that it's put them in the worst possible spot. They're straddling. Remember how when the Warriors were saying we're going to do a 2-timeline thing, and we all looked at it and said, I don't know, good luck. And then they won a championship while they still had all those young guys, and you go, wow, you know what? Maybe they'll pull this off. Oh, a year later, Weissman's gone, Poole is gone. Who knows how much longer Kuminga and Moody are going to be there? And that's a team that's won championships that was trying to straddle two eras and realized, you know what? This just isn't possible. We have to be all in on Steph. They're trading for Chris Paul, 38-year-old Chris Paul, by giving up 22-year-old Jordan Poole, having already given up young James Weissman, because they know and have had to come to terms with, once again, as teams always do, you don't win with youth in this league. You win with vets. So the Warriors, a team that has the championships and therefore has that extra cushion to maybe experiment a little before pivoting, they could do that. The Trailblazers, they're trying to straddle eras. Oh, Shaedon Sharpe, yeah, we're picking Shaedon Sharpe, or we're using the 7th pick in the 2022 draft. It was 7th, right? I thought they should have traded the pick last year, and Sharpe looks like he's going to be a good player. They should have traded the pick this year. Scoot Henderson could be a phenomenal player. But the Trailblazers over the last 12 months, you could conclude based on the moves they've made, they've done more to build the future than the present. That's a problem when you still have Damian Lillard at age, 33 on the roster.
With 34 next year. Yeah.
So, all right. So look, it's late June. The draft just happened 12 hours ago. Much of the offseason still to go, right? So I don't want to be hasty to judge here, but it feels like they're still straddling two eras in a way that is hamstringing the present in favor of the future. So that's not getting Dame what he needs. But there's time, right? For all we know, they could still trade Scoot Henderson in the next few weeks. When we get to free agency.
I doubt that. I doubt that. I
mean,
doubt that.
Just saying, like, sometimes it's hard to do it in the moment or to find the right deal.
Yeah.
But maybe Dame starts applying more pressure, or maybe it goes the other direction, as you were kind of alluding to, which is they're saying, you know what? There's no way we're trading Scoot Henderson. We think this guy could anchor our team for the next decade plus. And we think him and Shaedon Sharpe and Anthony Simons and some of the other young players we've got are the future. And then Dame finally cracks and says, you know what, guys, that's cool. I see what you're doing with these guys. I don't blame you, but you know what? Now is the time. And hello, Miami.
Yeah, this is one of those situations where nobody really has to be the bad guy, I don't think. I think if you get to mid-July, the Blazers can say we did everything we could, but because we are not on a championship level right now, we're going to do right by Damian Lillard and work with him to find the best team that can help him win a championship in the final stages of his career. And look, as we both know, it would put them in a great position. Like, they already have a really interesting young core. Like, yeah. Anthony Simons is a good player. We'll see if he becomes a great player, but he is a good to really good player right now. Shaedon Sharpe showed a lot of potential last season. Scoot Henderson, he could turn out to be the next Damian Lillard. This, kind of 6'2", bulldog who's got the Russell Westbrook, athleticism with a little bit of that Chris Paul type, twitchiness, the playmaker in him. He could turn out to be, that next guy. And then whatever you get for Damian Lillard, it's going to help you add more pieces to that puzzle, whether it's a young player add to the mix or multiple draft picks add to the mix. Now, look, we talk about Damian Lillard a lot, on this show, and he's talked about a lot across a lot of shows, but now is the time. Now is the time for Portland to move on. Last thing, let's put it to you this way. Opening night, 2023-24 season, what uniform is Damian Lillard wearing?
It's tough. I suspect it's going to be the Portland Trailblazers.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
After all that,
yeah, I do. Because I just don't think either side wants to actually push the issue. I know we all want to see fireworks. We all love a big trade. We all love a blockbuster. And I think everybody who's a basketball fan would love to see Damian Lillard in a position where he can actually compete for championships. That, by the way, real quick to the people who get very provincial about this stuff, that's not anti-Portland. It's not anti-small market. It's a 33-year-old player who is nearing the twilight of his career. Who's still playing at a really high level.
The Celtics did this 10 years ago. They did this when they realized they weren't going to win a championship. They dumped their stars. It happens.
But at least they had won a championship and been to a couple of finals. Damian Lillard's never been to the finals. Damian Lillard is an all-time great on the 75th anniversary team and who has never been to the finals. And I think anybody who's a basketball fan, you don't have to be pro-Portland, anti-Portland, anything. You could just want to see that Damian Lillard gets a chance to make a big run. It'd be fun to see him with Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo in Miami if they could figure that out. I'm a little more skeptical of the Nets' ability to compete at a high level by bringing him in to play with Mikal Bridges and whatever's left over. But who knows? The Nets are pretty aggressive and pretty creative, and they've got a lot of tools to work with if they wanted to do something. I suspect he's still going to be in a Blazers uniform, but if you were saying, if the question is, where's he going to play because it's not Portland, Miami does it.
I'm going to say Brooklyn. I'm going to say he plays in Brooklyn. I think Miami gets aggressive in these next couple of weeks. I don't know. I don't know specifically to Portland, but I don't know what kind of appetite there is for Tyler Hero with that contract as a centerpiece of a deal. And Miami doesn't have the draft capital that Brooklyn has.
True.
Brooklyn has something like 11 picks over the next 6 years or some number that's crazy like that. And the Nets, like if you're Portland and you want to buy low on Ben Simmons and see if you can be the team in a low pressure environment that can reinvigorate him and add him to that group, you take that salary, and then you take all the draft capital that the Nets can offer you or are willing to offer you. And then all of a sudden you plug Damian Lillard onto a team with Mikal Bridges, with Spencer Dinwiddie, with some of the Dorian Finney-Smiths, the role players they have in that team. That's pretty good. And today's NBA, Howard, where stars are fracturing everywhere outside of Phoenix, you give yourself a chance to win in a situation like that if Lillard stays healthy.
Yeah, and listen, I'll just say this. Like, I know everybody looks at Ben Simmons as being like this albatross contract, and it is. But Ben Simmons is still young enough that if he gets his body right and gets his confidence back, and in a smaller market, there's a better chance of that, I think. By the way, he only has 1 year left after this year.
I know. It gets better. The contract gets a little bit better every single year.
This is not the Bradley Beal contract. It doesn't go as high as the Bradley Beal contract. It doesn't have a no trade clause like the Bradley Beal contract. Granted, Bradley Beal is a much better player than Ben Simmons at this stage, but he's also several years younger than Bradley Beal. And there's 1 year left after this deal. He's at like 38 million and then 40 million, Ben Simmons. And, he's at a stage of his career where you don't have to worry about, if we've got Scoot Henderson, what are we doing with Ben Simmons? Ben Simmons is not a point guard anymore. Ben Simmons is just a really tall guy who could do a lot of different things, guard a lot of positions. The Nets were using him as a backup center. So if you bring in Ben Simmons for contract matching purposes and just for like, let's take a flyer because we're rebuilding anyway. I'm with you on this part of it. A trade built around Ben Simmons' contract, plus a boatload of picks that the Nets have to work with, plus some other, pieces from their roster. And what's left in Brooklyn, I don't know if it's a title contender, but it's at least a really intriguing team and a much better team. Damian Lillard plus Mikal Bridges, Dorian Finney-Smith, Nick Claxton is already better than what the Blazers have had the last couple of years.
I agree. Be interesting next couple of weeks for Damian Lillard. Follow Howard Beck on Twitter at Howard Beck. Read his stuff in GQ.com. Listen to him on the Locked On Sports Podcast Network. Howard, always good to catch up, my friend.
Always a pleasure, sir.